I think it's 10 o'clock, so we will get started. I want to honor the time frame, and hopefully I will be able to keep track of it. I see the clock up on the wall is a little bit off, so I'm going to try and watch my phone, but you guys can be sure to give me the stop if I'm running over a little bit. So, thank you for coming in today. I appreciate that you're all here. I am Jessica Shepard. I'm the school psychologist. I work for ESU 9 out of Hastings. Right now, I currently go to Superior Public Schools and provide them with school psychology services. But I have worked for Giltner and Hampton and Blue Hill in the past, so I do see some familiar faces, which is great. So the fact that all of you are here makes me very excited because it tells me that you are interested in behavior, and it's certainly something that as a school psychologist that I deal with frequently. So I am very excited that I have the opportunity to share some tips and tricks with you about behavior plans specifically. So this is right out of your book, what our objectives were for today. We're actually going to kind of start with why do students act this way, why do we then go into why we have behavior plans, and then because I'm a psychologist, I'm nerdy excited about operant conditioning, and so that's what we're going to talk about also today. So why do we have behavior plans? Well, it's because we have behaviors, right? We have kids that get frustrated in class. We have kids that blurt in class. Sometimes we get frustrated and have to do this for ourselves sometimes. So the root cause of behaviors, though, why do we have behaviors in our classroom? No educational presentation would be complete without a pyramid. I'm looking at Joe because we've talked about this before. So what this is, and you've probably all been familiar with it, you've heard of it, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So what does Maslow's hierarchy of needs have anything to do with students and education? Well, what it talks about is that basically we have to have basic needs met for our students before they're actually able to come to school and learn. So before we're able to engage in any kind of problem-solving processes, before we're able to learn, we have to have basic needs met, and then we work upwards from there. So if you don't have the base of your pyramid, then you're not going to be able to learn new skills and problem solve in your classrooms. And this is true for us as well, as adults. If you don't have some place to go to bed at night, and that's something that you're worried about, you're probably not going to be a great learner that day. If you don't feel safe in the school that you're in or the environment that you're in, you're probably not going to be a great learner that day. It's also very important that students feel love and belonging and that they have a sense of self-esteem and self-respect also if we're going to get them to problem solve and learn. So it's when these needs aren't met, right, that we see behaviors come out of that. So when students don't have the basic needs that they want, then we'll often see them engage in behaviors to try and have those needs met. So any of us in this room, and that's a point that I'm going to make a lot in my short talk with you today, is that I want you to not just understand students' behavior, but you have to understand your own behavior as well, because we're the same creatures. We just do it a little bit differently. So the behaviors and the things that your students experience in your classroom, often you're experiencing the same things throughout your day. We're just a little bit better at handling it than they are. So if we don't have our needs met, then what we will do is we'll increase the frequency, duration, and intensity of our behaviors until our needs are met. So the purpose of manipulative behavior is to get the safety and security your environment is not giving you. So all people will manipulate other people, places, things in your environment to meet your needs. We do this daily. And that's the fun part of it, is that we can understand it because we do it daily all the time. We just don't think about it. Maybe I'll give you a fun example. How many of you have had a student act like this with you, or your own children, right? So you notice how he increased the intensity, the duration, and the frequency of his behavior. So mom didn't respond right away, so he just continued. So that's his, he's increasing the duration of what he's doing. He increases the frequency, he says her name over and over again. He increases the intensity, he changes it, and he doesn't just say mom, he says Lois, because mom clearly isn't working. So this is a very simplified version of someone trying to get their needs met. Once the needs were met, the behavior quit, right? Because he needed that hello from mom. We never know why they need it, but they seem to need it all the time, right? So an adult example, when our needs aren't met, for example, what if you're cold? What kind of things do? You can grab a sweater, right? That would be, a way for you to meet the need of your behavior, is to grab a sweater. You might, if you're at work, you might go in and talk to your boss and plead, I'm cold, I'm very cold right now. I need, to tell them, try to create a logical argument. My brain cells are frozen. I can't teach children my brain cells are frozen. You might actually go up to the thermostat, if you guys have that capability. You might change the heat, turn it up. You might bring in a heater into your classroom or put it underneath your desk in order to get yourself warm again. Or you might just leave. And maybe that's, you move your whole classroom to another environment because you're cold or hot or whatever. Or you just leave the building. Now, the fun part of this is that some of this is appropriate behavior and some of it's not. And it depends on the situation, which makes it even more complicated. So for us to learn this over time and working where we worked, we've learned that some of these are appropriate and some of them are not. So, it's appropriate for me to go talk to my boss, but maybe the fire marshal says I can't have a heater, but maybe I do it anyway, right? Because I need my needs met, right? We can relate to this. I need my needs met, so I don't care if that's the rule. I'm doing it anyway. How many times have we thought about this and done it? Or changing the thermostat. Well, I'm not supposed to do it. They tell me I'm not supposed to do it, but dang it, I'm cold. I need to be able to be warm. So again, some of these are appropriate, some of them not so much. So another one too that I often laugh about is we have windows in our classrooms, right? How many of you have opened a window because you're hot or cold or whatever? In some of my schools, that's against the rules. You are not supposed to open the windows. The custodians say, no, don't do it. They do it anyway, and you hear them in the teacher's lounge. Well, I opened my window today because it was a beautiful day outside. And so I laugh. I'm like, we're breaking the rules as adults, but we're trying to get our needs met. So as adults, we have coping strategies and the authority to change our daily situation to ensure our needs are met. Or we can do it in constructive ways. If we're cold, we can do those things. If we're hungry, we have snacks available. We can change our own schedule so we can eat at a different time. Or ask that person who always has food in their purse, right? They have 6 kids, they have gummy bears and granola bars, and we hit them up every time. Or someone's annoying you. We have very good adult ways of handling that. We can avoid them, we can walk away, or we can just complain to one another later. Kids don't always have this ability, though. Sometimes they struggle with those skills. They don't know what's appropriate in this context. They just want to get to their end goal, and so they engage in behaviors, and oftentimes this is when they come to us and we find the behaviors and we have to deal with them. So here's one example. We have a student who's not good at math. What does he do? He distracts the teacher. This kiddo is saying, ma'am, what are your personal views about the character of Hamlet? Maybe it's not that specific, but we've had him ask these questions of us before, right? Like, why do I even have to learn math? And then we're teachers, so we bite. And we talk about why we have to learn math. We talk about how it's going to be beneficial to their future. Because we're teachers, we have to respond to that, right? He's getting what he wants because at the end of the day, lessons takes twice as long and there's less homework. Bell rings, forgot to assign the homework, doesn't matter, we're leaving. So the behavior works, right? For this one kiddo who's not very good at math, he distracted you, got what he wanted, behavior worked and it was appropriate. So kids can change their environment and stuff, but sometimes it's a little bit maladaptive. And they take that quickest path to get to the end result, even though, it isn't all that great of behavior, and then it wears on us, and then we get frustrated too. So behavior plans are born from this. There's lots of steps in between, I understand. Depending upon how your school works, you guys might be forming behavior plans in your classrooms. You might have to take it to the student assistance team. You might have a behavior response team that will handle this. You might talk to your school psychologist and they will support you with this. We might do some testing. We might do a functional behavior assessment. So there's lots of pieces that kind of come in before we actually go through and have a behavior intervention plan in place. But we're not necessarily going to talk about those skills because I want to talk about what the importance of those behavior plans are and the things that we do to make sure that we have a solid plan in place. But first I have to jump on my soapbox. There's no box around, so you can just pretend that I'm standing on my soapbox. It's not a political issue, but it is an issue that I think is important to address when we're talking about behavior intervention plans. So kids should just follow the rules, right? Like, they should just do what they're supposed to do. They should just do what they're told. Oh, really? Do we do what we're told all the time? We just talked about the whole heat situation, and I gave you a couple of examples where I know personally I have violated the rules. Because I get cold, and so, as you can tell as I'm in a sweater, I get cold, so I want my heat, and sometimes I violate the rules. You can just earmuffs on that one. How about when we're driving? Does everyone drive the speed limit all the time? Some of you are nodding your heads. You're amazing. That's great. I used to be able to say that, not anymore. Do you ever drive above the speed limit? Of course most of us do, except for these two angels over here.
The joke is I just got pulled over.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, you drive the speed limit. Sometimes we do, okay? Sometimes we don't. And it changes based upon maybe the road that we're on. Like we know, showboat, the cops sit there. Or we know that the bypass, the cops are always there during the day, always. So I guess I better not speed. But we know that maybe they're never like around Pauline, so I know I can go to 60 and not 55 around there because there's no cops ever. Do you know where the officers patrol? So you know where they sit. Like I know officer so-and-so is always sitting on the corner or whatever, so I always have to make sure that I'm following the speed limit when I go by there. Interstates versus highway versus gravel. There's a different risk there, right? There's not as many county cops on the gravel, so we don't have to always follow the speed limit when we're driving on gravel. Interstate may be the same way, or you follow the traffic around you. If somebody else is going faster, you follow that. Or where you've received a ticket in the past. If you've just received one recently, you're probably going to start following the speed limit for a little while until that's kind of subsided and you forget about it. Or certain places, right? You have that memory of, ooh, I got a ticket over here, so maybe I better slow down and follow the speed limit. So how can we expect our kids to follow the rules all the time, right? We don't even do this. This is a really tough skill to do. The other piece of that is punitive approaches. So when we are punishing kids, when we are providing, just instant consequences for them, it doesn't always work. This is Otten slide 43 because this comes directly from Kay Otten. I'll put a plug in for her book. It's How to Reach and Teach Children with Challenging Behaviors. You can tell this one is very worn and has lots of extra copies made because it's one I reference frequently. It's absolutely textbook material that I got from a class that I took at one time, but still has some good information in it. She talks about maybe reasons why kids' behavior has changed a little bit. It has some great reference for some interventions, which we'll hit on a few today, but if you're interested, you can flip through that one here as well. So this is words from her directly, problems with behavior. It works for 80 to 90% of our kids, but for our kids that have constant reoccurring behavior problems, giving them punishments and sending them to the office is not going to be effective. The two big ones here are that the kids identify punishment with their punishers. How many kids have you heard before that are like, I don't like school, or Mrs. Jones hates me, she sucks, she's always getting mad at me, right? And even though we're like, it's your behavior that I'm getting mad at, it's your behavior. But if we're punishing them, then we're the bad guy, not the behavior. They're not learning anything from that other than I have to watch maybe what I do around her because she gets me in trouble. And some students are reinforced by the reaction that accompanies this approach. So some students like the attention. Even if it's negative, they still get one-on-one attention, right? We send them to the office and all the fun stuff happens at the office. Then I get to watch the other kids that are getting in trouble. I get to watch all the parents that come in. I get to watch all that stuff. And the secretary's checking on me, the principal's checking on me. This is great versus sitting in the back of the classroom having to do what I'm supposed to do. So punishment is just not something that works well. So when we talk about interactions with our kiddos, there's basically 3 ways that we can interact with them. And this is, stuff for students in general. We can either be very strict, but then what that results in is that the students blame us. They feel shameful for the behavior, which is not an effective way to change behavior. They rebel against us, they avoid us, and then they become manipulative. How can I get my needs met a different way? Just maybe have to be a little more sneaky about it. We can be permissive with them, but often then students walk all over us, they don't learn the skills, and then they engage in entitlement kind of behaviors. So the most appropriate approach for us is this positive discipline. So when we are kind but firm, when we tell them what the expectations are, then what we end up with is students who are responsible, and they're actually gaining life skills through this process, because we are teaching them what is appropriate, teaching them the problem-solving skills. This is my reminder to step off the soapbox and move forward. That would be great. So, what makes a good behavior intervention plan? This is a great summary that I love. I totally stole this from Matt McNiff, so he gets credit for it. The components of a different behavior plan. So obviously we have a hypothesized function for our behaviors. And so what this is why is the student engaging in that behavior? We have to find that reason, and it's so important, guys, because we have to know whether or not that student wants control in their environment, whether they are wanting attention in their environment, because we're going to address it so much differently. So we have to do a lot of data gathering for this process, and this is where it's not fun. Because this is when I come into your classroom and I say, hey, every single time that Johnny engages in this behavior, I need you to write it down. I need you to write down the behavior. I need to write down what happened beforehand and what happened afterwards. How did you respond? And it seems really tedious, but that data gathering can get us right directly to the function of our behavior for our kids. And then we can be so much more effective when we're addressing it. What we want to end up with is an operational definition. So when you come to me or when you come to your teachers and you're brainstorming that the student has challenging behaviors, we need to know exactly what those challenging behaviors are. So you might say, he annoys his peers. I need to know what that looks like, because I can't teach a behavior of not annoying your peers unless I know what that looks like. You know, are we distracting because we're noisy? You know, is he making comments? Is he tapping his pencil and annoying his peers? We need to know exactly what that behavior looks like. And so again, this is where our data gathering becomes easier. Makes it easier for us in our future. Replacement behavior. If we're going to have a good behavior intervention plan, we have to know what the behavior is, and then we have to come up with a way to replace it. What are we going to put in place of that? Because again, you have to think back to your Maslow's hierarchy. The student was engaging in a behavior because a need wasn't being met. So what is that need that they're meeting, and then what are we going to fill that in with that's going to be more appropriate? So what's actually going to be, you know, a compatible behavior for whatever situation the student is engaging in. We have to find that replacement behavior and make sure we select it. Then we have to give them a function of that replacement behavior. We have to teach. We have to assume that they probably don't have that skill before, and that's why we're refilling it with this new replacement behavior. And it's so important who's going to teach that how and where. We have to make sure that we're writing that down. And the where is huge, because we all know that we're learning better if we are practicing that skill in the environment that we're going to use it. So it's okay if we want to teach that student the behavior outside of that environment and have someone teach them, but we need to be making sure that we're reinforcing it or teaching it again in the environment that they need to use it. You know, if it's in the classroom, then we need to be practicing it in the classroom. Or if it's in the gym, we need to be practicing it in the gym. And the strategy that I always recommend is I do, we do, you do. And it's a basic teaching strategy. You've probably heard it many times. And we can make it very simplified for behavior too. It doesn't have to be this great big lesson plan situation. Prevention strategies. I'm not necessarily going to address a lot of prevention strategies in this presentation because I feel like then I could talk for half a day and you guys would be incredibly sick of me. So prevention strategies are those things that we talk about usually in our STAT teams. We can talk about them with our behavior teams as well. But it can be curricular. So is the student actually at the level of the academic work that we're giving them? Do they need modifications or accommodations to their work? Environmental, are they easily distracted and we've got them back in the back of the room next to the pencil sharpener? Or certain lights that bother them, or certain other students that bother them? And then staff changes. We have to change our own behavior. And that's sometimes the hardest part. Because again, you have to think about your own behaviors and how we react and get our needs met. We have to change our behavior if we're going to change that student's behavior. So sometimes it's a mindset shift. So I won't talk as much about prevention strategies, but I also have some tips and tricks on the back of the handout that you were given. If you want to look at some of those are prevention in a sense. So positive reinforcement system, this is the fun part because this is the operant conditioning part. Basically we're reinforcing that behavior. We're making sure that it's positive and that they get frequent reinforcements for it and that it's effective. The other piece that's really huge is data collection. None of us like it, but it's a necessary evil. We have to have that data because what if we got the function wrong? Because that happens. That absolutely happens. We might have got the function wrong, and so we're not progressing the way that we should be. So we have to have data to prove that, and then usually if we're collecting data along the way, then we can stop and say, this isn't working. So we need to review that frequently. Fidelity is the other piece that is huge. Fidelity is us being consistent in providing the instruction and following the behavior plan. I'll hit on this again, but I really can't say it enough. We have to be consistent with behavior plans. So, you know, think about, like, you're trying to go on a diet, right? I can't go, oh, I went one day, I followed my behavior plan, I didn't lose an ounce, maybe I even gained weight. Do we abandon it? No, because it takes time. Behavior is the same way. It takes time for us to do this. So we have to give it more than a day, but we have to still follow the plan, which is hard, because I know if it's not working, we want to change things up. Oh, maybe this will work if we do it this way. Right away, we have to stick to our plan. We have to be so consistent with that. And it's tough. I totally understand.
I
Yeah.
have a question. I know it's going to be like kid-based, but on average, what would you think, for how long should a plan go into effect before you start to realize, okay, this isn't working, we need to either change the reinforcement or change the plan? Is there like a general average that you should use?
What research will say is like 10 data points. The other piece of information, especially when we look at behavior, there's research that was done on forming habits, and that's kind of what we're doing, is we're changing habits. And so the research based on habits will say you need to have a plan that is implemented with fidelity for 1 month for every year that student engaged in the behavior. And that's forever, you guys. And the other fun piece about this too is that kids have extinction bursts, right? So all of a sudden we start holding them accountable for a behavior, and we're changing what we're doing with them. And the fun part is they're going to push limits on us. So it gets worse. It can get much, much worse before it gets better, because they're pushing those limits. They're really trying to see, are you really holding me accountable like you said you were? So a month can seem like forever. I know, but that's a great question, because that is huge.
Thanks, Sarah.
So then we follow up, then we check back in with that information, we see how we're doing, and we make changes as necessary. So I just kind of broke this down. Maybe this was more for me than everybody else, but just letting you know, triggers is what we're going to talk about next. We'll talk about lacking skills and teaching those, and then we will also talk about reinforcement as well. So triggers, these are what happens immediately before the behavior, and this is where that data collection piece comes in. It helps us determine the function of the student's behavior so we can start to create our operational definitions. So this fun little piece in our school psychology world is what I call a hypothesis statement. And it's a hypothesis statement because sometimes we get it wrong. And so we have to change that. But basically after we gather all this data, I'm looking for what triggers the problem, and I'm going to write that down in word form so that we can understand it. So when Tim is expected to complete his math work independently at his seat, he distracts other students by talking to them and making vocal noises. This allows Tim to escape and avoid the task associated with educational deficits in math, which make his seat work difficult for Tim. So I'm very clear about what's happening here, right? You guys could walk into this situation and probably already recommend some interventions that would happen here. So that's how clear we have to be about it. Because let's face it, how many times have you sat down and we're talking about behavior kids, and we just get muddled because we're all kind of admiring the problem. And we're like, isn't it fascinating that he can distract his peers for like 20 minutes, and he can have me pissed off in 3 minutes? And you know, we talk about a lot of like, you won't believe what happened exactly today. We do a lot of that, but it's so much better if we can define a specific behavior that we want to change. We have to pin it down, and we have to make it very clear. Sometimes it doesn't feel this simple, but we have to sit down and pick that one behavior and write it out so we know what we're dealing with. Consider everything. Anything can be a trigger. Everything can be a trigger, which makes our job so much harder. It can be homework. It can be a certain student interaction. It can be transition times. It can be a subject in the day, sensory needs, type of request that was given to them, a request from a certain person, a change in routine, or a conflict that they're having with students. And the other fun piece is that we're all different, right? So what trips you off might not trip off someone else, or what trips off, you know, your students in your classroom are totally different because we're all different people. So I love it. I'm good or bad, depending on the circumstances, the situation, or the people involved. So we have to teach this skill. I love this. If a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we send them to the principal's office, right? It's hard. That's not our instant reaction. Normally we go to, well, we don't teach that behavior. So it's something that we have to change our own mindset. We do have to teach these behaviors. We just have to assume that the student doesn't know it. And it makes it easier for you too, because then it bothers you less, right? If we stop thinking about the kid's here just to make me mad or make my day miserable, and we start thinking about, why is he doing that behavior? what is the purpose of that behavior, and what skills does he need to have in order to stop engaging in that. So how we provide instructions for them, we model it, we rehearse it, and then we provide them with feedback. The simplified version is I do, we do, you do. So we are gradually pulling back what is required of them. We will watch this really fun video. These gals look so serious.
Now we're going to get to the project where you are going to have to create a portrait. One of my strategies is the I do, we do, you do. Every time I introduce a new concept, I'm going to do that. There might be a student that doesn't need modeling, but there's always a student that does. So why wouldn't I provide that scaffold for them? So every time I ask them to do something, I model it first. My students are not only in mild to moderate special education, but they're also long-term English language learners. You're each going to get a portrait scenario, okay? You're going to have to create a portrait. I'll show you, here's the sample photo. I don't know if you recognize Miss Talbot, and that's me, and this is our example portrait. But it's important to show students how we think. So when I introduced the final project, I had an example of what I wanted the finished project to be, and I had a graphic organizer up that was blank, which looked identical to theirs, and I had the synopsis. This is the sample. Look up here and follow along. This is a portrait of two sisters who are very good girls. The I do part is just me modeling how I'm thinking about the picture. I'm just thinking aloud. So I need to think, how can I portray this? So I'm going to start and I'm going to say, okay, sisters who are very good girls. The whole thing is a gradual release of responsibility from teacher to student. What kind of clothing would I wear if I were a good girl? Ooh. At this point, I'm not asking for student participation, but they might jump in and say something, and that's fine. But I can't, at that point, then say, oh, they all get it, and just skip to the YouTube. You know, because 2 people chimed in, but I had 12 students there today, so I have to assume that maybe 10 were still listening or kind of not there yet. But when I first started teaching, I would have said, great, they got it. Okay, let's move on. You guys do. So then I moved on and I did the we do. So the we do portion of the lesson is really you're still providing prompting. And that's really what we do means, is that I'm not leaving it hanging. They study all the time. I think I can show that by prompts. What would I be holding if I studied all the time? Books. The you do was the actual project. So then I said, okay, now you're ready to do it, and I gave each group their synopsis and their graphic organizer.
And then, okay, the grandparents are gonna be, you're gonna be the grandfather, you're gonna be the grandmother. He has to wear like a beard.
I found that the clearer I am, the better quality work I see from the students. And because the students know what they're doing, they feel safe learning new things.
So some great examples there. Again, it's a strategy you guys probably use all the time. And she was using it in a curriculum environment, but we use this for behavior too. And it doesn't have to be that complex. It's just the way that we're teaching it. So a lot of us have like classroom expectations or hallway expectations. So you see a kiddo running down the hallway, you might go, oh, stop. It looks like we need to practice that again. So you can show them. Oh, I'm going to show you how we are supposed to walk in the hallway. And you talk about how I have a quiet voice, my feet are walking slowly in the hallway, my hands are to myself. And then you go, let's try it together. So you get the kiddo and he walks next to you. Oh, see how we have nice feet and we're walking quietly down the hallway. And then you say, okay, now you practice it. Go from right there and then you go ahead and go back to your class where you're supposed to. So it's a really quick, that might have taken 2 minutes of your day, but you're reinforcing that behavior, and that's exactly what you're doing, is the I do, we do, you do. Procedure. So it doesn't have to be that complicated with behavior. It can be really small snippets of things. So some of you are like, that's great, doesn't work for me. I totally get that. So sometimes we have students who don't want to listen. right? They don't want to hear us talking. One thing that we have to make sure that we're doing, this is kind of from our MANT training system. And so what we have to make sure that we're doing is that a student is not in the crisis cycle. Okay, there is research-based information out there that we are not able to problem solve when we are frustrated because our brains actually change the way that we interact with people, right? So if a student is escalated, that's not when we sit them down and go, here's what you should have done. We have to wait. We have to teach them when they are okay to be learning. So make sure that they are not within that crisis cycle, they are not upset when we're teaching them that behavior. So if they still don't want to listen, we can make it visual, we can make it more fun, we can do more of that modeling piece with them, give them reminders more often. How about a student tells you what they're supposed to do but they don't do it? This one drives me nuts, and I think it drives a lot of people nuts, especially with like the running in the hallway behavior. You stop a kid and you go, what's the expectation in the hallway? I'm supposed to walk with my feet quiet and with my hands to myself. So why didn't you do it, right? It drives us nuts. They can tell us exactly what the expectation is and what it says word for word, but they aren't performing the behavior. So what that tells us is that they need more practice and more reinforcement. So we need to practice it more. We need to praise them when we're practicing it. We need to highlight maybe the pieces that they're missing. So they've got it memorized, but now we need to get the muscle memory piece down so that in every single environment that they do, we practice it so much that it just becomes muscle memory for them. Again, so they tell you what to do. Make it a game, make it fun. Anytime you can practice the skill. One of the things that we have some students, especially younger ones, that maybe can't accept no, or they will say no constantly to us. So then we just practice that and we make it fun. So it's like, I'm going to tell you no, you're going to ask me some things that are kind of wild, like, hey, can we have a funnel cake party at school? And we tell them no, and they're giggling and laughing, but we get them to accept no in kind of some weird ways before then we can get them to implement it and generalize the skill. Make it fun however you can, because we don't want them to know that they're practicing a skill that they're going to have to generalize and use. So reinforcement, here's the fun piece. This is when I get kind of nerdy. So what happens after a student engages in a behavior, both positive or negative, that reinforces the behavior? This is huge for us. This is a big piece. What are they getting out of that behavior? What is their payoff? Because obviously, when we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're trying to gain something, a need that they have. So then what are they getting out of this behavior that is giving them that? And lots of different things can come from that. They can be getting attention from peers, like if the peers laugh if they say something. Attention from adults if we walk up and we provide that correction to them. They might be escaping a task, like maybe they don't end up having, to do the worksheet because now they're out of the classroom, or they escape the entire environment and they get to go to the office. So we have to watch what is happening when these students are engaging in this situation. So this is the operant conditioning part. So it's the process of learning behavioral patterns, which are based on certain stimuli from the environment, such that external stimuli lead to certain behavior. So essentially, we know what kind of consequences a particular behavior will lead to. So we change our behavior to either get more of that or get less of that. It really is that basic, and that's, we don't want to make our problems huge and mystical. It really is this basic. So here's the 4 different ways. You've got positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment. You guys don't have to remember all of this. I just want to make sure that I explain that to you, so you know that there's different pieces of it. Oh no. Let's find this. Well, 33. We may have to skip that one. How many of you like Big Bang Theory? I love Big Bang Theory. That's what makes me so sad. Okay, so in this particular episode, what's happening is that Sheldon is actually changing Penny's behavior. So Penny is talking on the phone very loudly in the living room, and he has milk duds. And so he kind of gives her a look because she's very loud, and she recognizes his nonverbal behavior, and so she starts to quiet down. He offers her a milk dud. And then things get louder, and so then he kind of gives her a look again. And so she leaves the room. But before she leaves, he offers her a milk dud. So he's reinforcing any time that she does a positive behavior and kind of giving her a nonverbal cue anytime she doesn't. So it's happening all the time around us, right? We are doing this with people that we know. We are doing this all the time, and the kids are doing it to us too. So just for your information, the psych nerdy part, the Skinner box is where this comes from. So Skinner was a researcher, and he started doing research based upon this, did a lot of this with rats, And basically what happened is that a rat is put in a cage where if he pushes a lever, he gets a pellet. And he likes pellets because food is good. So then what happens is that he just randomly presses the lever and realizes all of a sudden, after multiple accidental tries of pushing the lever, that he gets a pellet every time that happens. So what he realizes is he can do this. He can get that pellet. He has control over that now. One thing to note, though, is that this was continuous reinforcement. So that's why when we're developing behavior plans, we reward kids a lot up front all the time because we want them to know consistently this is going to happen. So we want to give them that positive reinforcement as much as possible because it's not until that behavior is learned and it's a habit that we start to do it without hoping that there's a positive reinforcement that's there. So then we can start pulling back later. But this is kind of where the research base come from. So again, I'm trying to apply this to ourselves along with our kids. So this applies to us, this operant conditioning. So we'll go back to driving because that's an easy example. So if you get a ticket, you're receiving positive punishment. So this is your reinforcement. And what the hope is that they've given you a ticket, so you have to pay a fine. So they're hoping we decrease your bad driving behavior, your speeding behavior, to avoid the negative, which is extra cost or court fees or time out of your day. How about if you get into an accident if you're driving? That's going to be a negative punishment because what's going to happen is you're going to, again, decrease your poor driving behavior. You're going to stop texting on your phone. You're going to slow down. So that positive in it isn't removed. Positive would be actually having your vehicle because it's not being fixed in the shop, or not having to pay additional money to have it fixed in the shop would be your positive. How about getting safe driving bonus checks? That would be positive reinforcement because we're literally getting money for engaging in appropriate behavior and not getting in accidents. This happens to us all the time. How about another example? Your spouse, your kids, right? So you guys are having a great conversation, everything is going well in your life, that's positive reinforcement. You guys are in a good place, you're in a good place with your kids, so you're talking to them, that's all positive, we're having positive interactions. How about if somebody makes you mad? Either your spouse or your kids. You might apply negative punishment, so you might give them the silent treatment. So what that is we are decreasing behavior, what is positive, which is the positive engagement, so that positive isn't removed. So basically we're trying to punish them. How about if nagging, this is a fun one, it kind of works both ways. It's either positive punishment, because we're trying to, we either decrease the nagging behavior, so that, and they do what's expected, so they avoid the nagging behavior, or we nag harder and harder until they actually do what they're supposed to do, and then we remove the nagging, and so the negative is removed. So it applies to every situation. We just don't realize it. This is happening all the time. We are manipulating other people's behavior, and they are manipulating our behavior all of the time. So, I love my little raccoon. I want you guys to try this, because part of being invested in behavior plans, part of being invested in changing a student's behavior, because like we talked about, it's going to take us potentially a month before we even start thinking about the fact that we've changed these students' habits and changed their behaviors. So you need to know that it's going to work. So my hope, or my assignment to all of you, is that you will try this. I don't care who you try it with, but that is my charge, that you will try picking a behavior, that you will reinforce or apply whatever else you need to change that behavior and be consistent. So, evaluate what maintains the current behavior that you're going to choose in your spouse, in your kids, whatever it is. What can you replace that behavior with? Run through the steps of a behavior intervention plan. Do you need to teach a skill? Do we need to apply reinforcement as needed to change that skill? Because again, you need to have buy-in. You need to know that this works. So think back to your behavior plan. So I will give you an example of this. So here was my problem. I wanted breakfast, but I didn't want to make it myself, right? So what I did was, it's my husband and I at home, so I hypothesized what his function of behavior was because he wasn't making breakfast. He wasn't making me breakfast, he wasn't making breakfast, it just wasn't happening. So his hypothesized function was that he was escaping and avoiding. So here's my operational definition of behavior, my hypothesis statement. When Chad is asked to make breakfast, he requests Jessica make it instead, therefore engaging in escape avoidance behavior due to the lack of skills and confidence in his own skills for making breakfast, right? So my replacement behavior was that I wanted Chad to make breakfast. Chad is my husband, by the way. Direct instruction is the replacement behavior. So here's where I had to apply some direct instruction. So he has a little lack of confidence making breakfast and some lack of skills. He can make eggs, I don't like eggs. So I had to work on this. I had to teach him what I wanted to make for breakfast, or what I wanted to be made for me. So I would drop hints like, I really like waffles. I would say things like, hey, do you know how waffles are made? So I employed the I do, we do, you do. So I would make waffles, and then I would say, would you like to help me make waffles? We need a cup. The cups are over here. And so I would, hey, here's where the utensils are to make the waffles. And then I would say things, of course, to reinforce the behavior. And I would talk about how breakfast is the most important meal of the day. We really should be eating breakfast more often. I know waffles aren't a healthy breakfast, but I just said we need to be a healthy family. We need to be eating breakfast every day. So then the positive reinforcement, anytime he would make breakfast or he would help me make breakfast, is that I would say things like, I have a great day because you made me breakfast, or I was able to be focused at work because you made me breakfast, or just thanking him, saying, that was delicious, thank you so much for making breakfast. And guess what? I get breakfast made for me almost every morning, right? So that sounds silly, and I know that sounds highly manipulative, and I promise you that I wasn't manipulative in this process, and I told my husband that I really wanted him to start making breakfast every morning. And so we worked through some of those steps together. But I want you guys to turn to a partner, and I want you to brainstorm here. Just for like 2 minutes, I'll give you, is there a behavior at your home or with your spouse or with your kids you want to change? What can be the replacement behavior for that, and how can you go about that? I'll give you 2 minutes.
I've got 43 years investigating. I've got him trained. I don't want to do it. The honeydew. You got it. And you know what? Every program still use the same thing. Like in that case, I would and you respond to him, but I am not putting me in idle chair. So or do I need to make a copy? Because you brought it up, yeah, you brought it up at the beginning, saying, well, maybe you're not getting them, so then I'm wondering, should I just start making?
Okay, do we all have some good examples of behavior that we want to change? I want to be conscious of the time, and I think I have 2 minutes left. So, in summary, behavior plans are established based upon a function of a student's behavior, and that is so important. So it reinforces and teaches the appropriate skill, but things have to be predictable and consistent for that student. We have to follow the behavior plans that they are in place. Otherwise, we won't make any headway, because then the student will learn, oh, I have to be consistent maybe with these two people, but not with anybody else, because nobody else holds me accountable. And here's the answer to your question. We have to deliver intervention with consistency and fidelity for 1 month for every year that the behavior has been in place. So this feels like eons, and this feels like forever. But this is based upon habit-forming research. So, keep calm and follow the behavior plan. I'll honor you guys' time. I will be up here for a little bit, so you guys can ask me questions if you'd like. But thank you very much for coming and your interest in attending. Thank you.